The fuel mitigation projects that go on in communities is a great asset for us. It allows us firefighters to get a jump on the fire and allows locals or communities to evacuate areas before homes become threatened. It buys us valuable time at a very chaotic time to allow people to get out, allow our resources to get in, and start battling the fire.
The Harrop-Proctor Community Forest started as an attempt by the local residents, which ended up being a successful attempt to gain control over managing their own watersheds.
When we heard that there was logging going to take place in the western side of the community, we started to pay attention. And so ended up with a blockade in Harrop, and that was after several years of trying to do something different.
The Harrop-Proctor Community Forest is very much a grassroots organization. It has always been volunteer-based. It was entirely created through the work of local volunteers. So it's very much the staff and contractors who are working for the community forest are reporting directly to the community.
The mandate of the community forest is to protect our watershed. In recent years, that focus has really shifted, particularly since the 2017 fire, to addressing forest fire mitigation.
We manage fuels because we want to manage wildfire. And the only element of the fire triangle that we can manage is fuel. The other elements are topography and weather, and we can't manage those. So if we want to affect fire, we have to work on the fuels.
Measure this one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The result of fire suppression on our ecosystems is that forest fuels have built up, and because of that buildup, it can cause large intensity wildfires that can have a catastrophic impact on the values that we want to protect and maintain in these ecosystems. We got 35. In the case of ecosystem resilience to wildfire, prescribed to remove those species that don't like drought, they don't like fire. We want to retain those species that tolerate fire and be resilient as the climate continues to change and shift.
It's important to think of fuel management in the context of the entire forest ecosystem. So we are managing fuels, but at the same time, we're also paying attention to the water values, to the biodiversity values, recreation, aesthetics. It's not one size fits all, and it's not just a single value proposition. So if we're right up against someone's house, protecting that house is of very high importance. But if we're right up near a creek, then water is in fact the most important factor. Or if we're in an important area of wildlife habitat, it's important to consider what the wildlife are and what their habitat needs are. And sometimes those needs are highly compatible with fuel management, and sometimes they're not. So it depends.
Fuel mitigation work is great because it allows us to actually do some preventative work ahead of the fire instead of all reactionary works.
There are several different types of fuel management. When we do a straight understory hand treatment, we're not so much altering the forest structure in a big way, but we're just cleaning up the fuels. When we're using mechanical treatments, we are actually using them in support of the continued resilience of the forest. Because of fire exclusion and because of climate change, we have unsustainable densities of conifers and unsustainable fuel loads. So we need to sometimes realign the trajectory of the forest ecosystem because fire has not been allowed to do that naturally. And when we realign it, we're reducing the density, we're retaining large trees, but we're increasing the diversity and allowing that shrub and deciduous layer to come in and result in a forest that's more resilient.
Fuel mitigation is very similar to firefighting, but without the fire. We're still creating fuel-free zones, trying to burn the excess fuel to get rid of it before the fire has a chance.
We have prescribed fire, which means managed fire on the landscape, which means running a controlled fire through an area to reduce the fuels.
One of the benefits of prescribed fire is controlling time of year that you're burning. An area like this could have burned in the middle of August by a lightning strike or human. In that case, you're going to get a higher severity burn than you would if you introduce fire to it on your own terms. It's really neat to come back to an area after we've burned it and see how the ecosystem's thriving with the regrowth, creating habitat for deer and birds, and just seeing it thrive.
The planning of the fuel mitigation work is really nice around the communities. We're actually removing the fuel closest to communities and access roads for people to evacuate in case there is a fire.
It's important to look at the entire interface between the forest and our communities. So that area where the community butts up right against the forest or the forest is intermixed with the community, we need to be looking at the entirety of the fuels in that band. And it's important also to connect up our treatments so that we have a continuous break to manage.
So if there's a community that has an established fuel break, the likelihood of that community also having approached Fire Smart around their houses is aware and understands the fire ecosystem that they live in. That's the biggest difference.
We also are working on developing landscape level or watershed level fuel breaks in the community forest. And these are not necessarily in the community interface area, but further up the mountain, because of 100 years of growth with no fires, have become continuous all the way from one valley over the ridge to the next valley. There's no break anywhere naturally at this point. So we are often using ridges or gentle slopes to put in a long, linear treatment that will allow access to fight a fire to stop it from spreading from one valley all the way to the next valley and continue on.
Some of these fires are massive, and the energy behind them, there aren't enough water bombers on the planet to throw enough water at some of these things. So you really have to change the type of fire you're seeing. And if you can break the continuity of fuels or the density of the forest, it changes the body of the fire, which gives us an opportunity to be successful with different suppression tactics.
Climate change adaptation and wildfire risk reduction in our ecosystems here are highly compatible. In fact, they need to be woven together, such that when we do the kinds of treatments we do to reduce wildfire risk, we're also adapting to the changing climate.
I think the perception of these types of fuel management activities have really changed, and more frequent and severe wildfire seasons, people have come to have a greater understanding that we need to manage these fuels in order to be proactive to help lessen the risk of these wildfires and catastrophic wildfires.
We need to shift our thinking in a way that allows for certain of our areas to not be as dense coniferous forests as we might want just for a timber purpose. The more resilient forest, the more fire-adapted forest, is actually one that is managed for multiple different values, which can include the timber and the wildlife and also wildfire.
It's not a war anymore in the way that you win or you lose. It's you grow along, you adapt, you live with, and then you do everything you can to make it so when you have a fire of scale and magnitude, that it behaves and reacts in a way that is the least impactful to our way of life and safety.